Hello, welcome to the Raw podcast, brought to you by the Sunderland Echo. My name is by James Copley and Phil Smith during the summer transfer window. Obviously, there's plenty to be discussing, and we will look into the Florent Gisolfi stuff in full as and when that is confirmed. But in the meantime, we thought we'd do something a little bit different today. Obviously, plenty of transfer speculation doing the rounds at the Stadium of Light, plenty of exit speculation as well. A lot of players being linked with potential departures. And with that in mind, we thought we'd go through every member of the first team squad, and there's quite a lot of them, and talk about who we think Sunderland will keep, who we think they could sell, and who could be a candidate for potential loan as well over the course of the coming weeks and months. Like I said, plenty to get through, so we might as well dive straight in. We'll go position by position. James, bit of a no-brainer to start. Number one, Anthony Patterson. I mean, surely a player you would imagine will still be at Sunderland this time. Well, this time next season, this time at the end of the transfer window.
Yeah, I think you keep Anthony Patterson. I think he proved his value in the playoff final against Sheffield United with two absolutely outstanding saves. He's obviously grown with the club. I think he deserves his chance in the Premier League. However, with Sunderland stepping up a division, I do think now there is a serious argument for competition, somebody to drive Patterson, whether that's an older or a younger goalkeeper, I'm not sure. Obviously, he doesn't have any Premier League experience, doesn't he? And I think he's, 24, 25, so it's still relatively young for a goalkeeper. So whilst I'd back him, I think in recent seasons, we haven't really had somebody that's pushed him. We've had Simon Moore deputised for him for 4 or 5 games last season. Obviously, we've had Alex Bass and Nathan Bishop previously who've deputised, but I would like to see a little bit of competition and quality in that goalkeeping area now for me. But he starts the season.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right, aren't you? I mean, it's interesting there, Phil, that James mentions Simon Moore. Obviously, he's been a very willing and able deputy. And I mean, where do you think his future now lies? Obviously, he's a little bit older than most Sunderland players. He's not a player who necessarily has a great deal of top flight experience. I mean, do you think he stays around the club this summer?
I think so. I mean, I think that's one of those where a lot of it will be driven by the player, I would imagine, in terms of where he feels he's at with his career. I think that, listen, anyone, all three of us can speak to this. You spend any time around the players, staff, they'll all tell you just an unbelievable sort of figure in the dressing room. Really, really sort of good character, really experienced, gets on really well with Anthony Patterson. I think is a big support to him. So for me, I think if we're talking about a goalkeeping group next season, absolutely no issues for me. Simon Moore sticking around. Probably agree with James that I think you might want to be looking to add somebody else to that mix. I think that's a fair comment. But for me, I think very comfortable with Simon Moore being your sort of experienced third goalkeeper, if you like. The only caveat to that being, if he's at a point where he wants to go and somewhere where he might have a bit more chance of playing, I would imagine that the club would sort of respect that. So for me, I think this is probably one of the ones, and there'll be a few as we go through, one that'll be driven by the player, I think. But certainly from my end, I think very sensible and probably the right thing to have him as one of your 3 goalkeepers. No problem with that whatsoever.
And I guess, James, if he does become the third man, if you like, that probably casts a fair amount of doubt over the likes of Blondie and Nathan Bishop, who's obviously been out on loan this season. I mean, are they 2 players who you think we could potentially see move on in some capacity?
Yeah, I think both. I think Bishop likely to be permanent, let's face it, and Blondie could be permanent or loan. I think, again, Phil's right to point out that the needs and the wants of the players, surely those 2 will want to play regular football. Obviously, Nathan Bishop's been out on loan, hasn't he? And he's had a taste of playing regular senior minutes. So it's probably best for both of their careers to go and do that. I don't really see much use for them sort of hanging around to play for the under-21s. Obviously, Sunderland have their own under-21s goalkeepers who are going to benefit from playing in the Premier League too. So I think it's best for all parties that both of those go.
And I guess it raises an interesting question as well, Phil, about Matty Young. Obviously, we've seen how impressive he was for Salford, a player who was so highly thought of on Weir's side, a player with a huge amount of potential. I mean, do you still think that it's probably a little bit too soon for him to be brought in as a member of Regis Labrissa's first team squad? Do you see him potentially heading out again for another loan, maybe trying to increase that experience yet again?
I think loan for me is the sensible option here. I think ideally to League One. I think that it's one of those where I'm not sure that Young is going to be quite ready yet to compete for regular minutes. And therefore, I think there's a question mark over what he'll really gain by just sort of training every day. Obviously, he'll learn from the senior goalkeepers, and it's a kind of an elite environment. But I just think you're onto a good thing with Young in terms of he's had a really solid first loan. Let's see if you can step him up a level. The one thing I would say about that is there's maybe an argument that you don't have to rush into that. You can maybe take a look at him in pre-season. If you get some minutes during pre-season, that might be good for everybody. Certainly for me, I'd be looking and saying League One loan, where he's going to play regularly, would be the absolute ideal scenario for Young. But I think there's a bit of time on that. I think, as I say, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world if he comes back in for a little while at the start of the pre-season and sort of trains a bit in that Premier League environment. I think that could only be a positive for him.
Good stuff. Moving on to defenders now, James. I mean, I think I probably already know your answer to this one, but we've got to mention him. Trey Hume.
Yeah, keep him with a new contract, please. I think, what more needs to be said about that one, really? Brilliant player, fantastic for the club, great servant, has grown with us. I think he does have the capability to step up to the top flight. Maybe we'll have to work on the timing of some of those tackles and the intensity of some of them, because I think in the Premier League with VAR, some of them might get pulled back. But he is a very, very good, clean slide tackler. But sometimes your heart is in your mouth when he makes those tackles, isn't it? Because if the time's slightly wrong or an inch off, then in the Premier League, they could be getting looked at. So, but no, a brilliant player, and I would love to see him stick around.
Similar sort of ilk, Phil. I mean, we saw how valuable he was over the course of that playoff campaign, but Dan Ballard's an absolute no-brainer, isn't he?
Yeah, I think so. I think when you draw your sort of list of players who you don't really have any concerns about being able to step up to the extra sort of intensity and physicality of the Premier League, unfortunately, Joe Bellingham was one of them, and he's one of the ones that's gone. But I think Dan Ballard's definitely in that sort of top tier of ones who is going to be a Premier League player in the long term, I think. So obviously he needs a bit of luck in terms of the injuries. I think that's the one frustration for Ballard over the last couple of years, but he's one of the 4 or 5 where, for me, I'm sitting here with absolutely zero doubts whatsoever. Starting line at the first day of the season, no concerns, no issues. Absolutely massive talent.
And alongside him, Phil, I mean, Luke O'Nien, obviously such a wonderful story. He's come all the way from League One right the way up to the Premier League with Sunderland. I mean, we know that Sunderland are probably going to be looking at defensive reinforcements, but you would imagine that Luke O'Nien will still very much be part of Regis Labrissa's plans next season.
Absolutely, and I think I am long past the point of trying to guess where Luke O'Nien's ceiling is, and long past the point of saying, can he do it at this level? Can he step up? He's made it, he's made us all look silly at one point over the last however many years since he arrived at the club. So, yeah, I mean, listen, it's definitely an area where, someone probably need to recruit 2 players, I think. Whether or not one of those is Chris Mepham, obviously time will tell. But I think it's one where, someone need to recruit 2 players, and then it's a big competition for the starting 11. But for me, there's no doubt Luke O'Nien's going to be a big part of this squad next season, and I'm not doubting whatsoever that he'll somehow end up in the team in some position and in some capacity, because that's just what Luke O'Nien does. But I think either way, such a big part of the club, such a big part of the dressing room, absolute no-brainer, definite keep.
Dennis Serkin, James, obviously a man who is in a slightly precarious contract situation. He's out of contract next summer, and Sunderland will no doubt be looking to extend his stay on Weir's side. I mean, obviously he's one that you would hope they'll be able to keep hold of, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think so. He would definitely make my Premier League squad. Would like to see that contract situation sorted out sooner rather than later. Obviously, there's been fresh reports about Tottenham potentially interested in bringing him back in. I think he can definitely make the step up. I think his early season form in the Championship was absolutely sublime. Then he had a few injury issues, didn't he? And he looked a bit tentative when he was coming back. But I think when you get Dennis Serkin, fit and firing and confident, he's a brilliant player. I mean, that goal against Coventry, where he gets the ball from Romain Mundle in his own half and runs all the way up and smashes one in. he's a brilliant player, and I think he's certainly got the attributes as well to play in the Premier League. So he's a definite keep for me.
What about Agilis? Obviously, a player who we know how good he can be. We've seen him perform really well for Sunderland over the course of his time in the club, but perhaps not quite often enough because of those injury issues that he's had. I mean, is he a player who you'd like to stick around and hopefully get a run of fitness behind him?
I really, really like him, and obviously, I think what he's got going for him is that he can play left back and centre back. And I think when he is fit and when he has been fit, he's actually shown that he's potentially a Premier League level defender. He's composed on the ball. He's intelligent. He's got great physical attributes. The only question mark, and it's a big question mark, is that fitness, isn't it? So you wouldn't want to hang your hat on him, but for me, he'd be a keep in a sense that maybe he needs a season of perhaps being on the fringes a little bit, but staying fit for that full season without being relied upon too heavily, and maybe he can come in and out for a couple of games. But I don't know what Phil thinks, but I think he's a really, really good defender. And it's just such a shame he's been plagued by injuries. I think that there's an argument actually that when everybody was fit last season, he was up there in terms of Sunderland's best centre-back, in terms of the levels of his performance. I know we didn't see him for maybe as much as Luke O'Nien, but availability is sometimes your best asset, isn't it? And he just wasn't available for the majority of the season. But when he does play, I'm always really, really impressed by him.
Yeah, I'm leaning towards keep for two reasons. One is the versatility, I think, which James mentions is absolutely right. I think if you've got a player who can cover a few different roles, I think that's great, especially a team like Sunderland, who we know like to run quite a lean squad, I think, as well. The other thing is, as James says, his performances when he's fit have been very good, and he's got a lot of pace, which is a big thing for me. Stepping up to the Premier League, I think players need that. So I'm leaning towards keep. I think it's one where if you get to the very end of the transfer window and everything's gone great in terms of your income and business and you've strengthened, does it then become a loan? I think there's a discussion around that. But sitting here right now, I'm leaning towards keep. I agree with James's assessment entirely. I think he can definitely offer something. And while he might not be a week in, week out starter, I don't think there's necessarily any great harm in that if it allows him to stay fit. So leaning towards keep, potential loan if Messrs. Speakman and potentially Gisolfi can do the business.
Another man who's obviously had his injury issues, Phil, Niall Huggins. Similar story to release, really, isn't it? When he plays, he looks brilliant, but he just hasn't been able to play as much as he or anyone on Wearside would have liked. I mean, where do you think he stands this summer? Because he has been out for a long, long time now.
Yeah, I think that's just one where nobody has to kind of rush into anything. I think that he's been out for such a long time. By all accounts, trained really, really well when he sort of came back at the end of last season, and that's a big positive. For me, I just think we saw the last time he came back and did so really well. The main thing for Huggins is to have a full pre-season. So from my perspective, Huggins is a bonus ball, really. If he can get fit, if he can produce the level of performance he was before he got that last injury, then he can play a part. Obviously, he'll want to play and he'll want to get back out playing minutes, so a loan comes into the equation at some point. But I don't see why any party needs to sort of rush into that. So for me, just let him train, let him get fit, let him get minutes in pre-season, make a decision further down the line. I think that's one of the ones where you can just step back and just let him train, let him get up to speed, and we'll take it from there.
What do you make of Leo Hjelde, James? Obviously, a player who's sort of been on the periphery a little bit. We've got a few minutes here and there when Sunderland had their injury issues last season. But you would assume that if Sunderland are to strengthen, that would potentially push him a little bit further down the pecking order. I mean, do you think he could be a candidate for maybe a temporary exit this summer?
Yeah, I think a loan move is probably on the cards, isn't it? We forget how young he is. I think he's 20, 21, something like that. I feel a bit sorry for him in a sense that, when he joined the club was at a little bit of a low ebb and he struggled to sort of break in. He's been like left back, centre back, hasn't he, during the season? He's been injury cover, so he's never really had like a proper run of like 15 games. And I always think it's really hard to judge a player. But Lebris trusts him. I think he kept him around. He's given him responsibility as well. He captained the side in the Carabao Cup against Preston. So I think it's probably best for him that he goes and plays some games, and perhaps there's a player there, and next summer will be a good opportunity to sort of reassess that one. I think a loan move could do him the world of good, because I think as important as your talent sometimes is your is your character and your work rate and your work ethic. Luke O'Nine's shown that as well. And, Leo Hjelde being such a good lad and being such a good trainer and a good professional, I think he's probably worth keeping an eye on for another season at least and just see how he develops that on loan.
I think I'd be really big on getting him to go somewhere where he can play as a centre-half regularly, because we've still never really seen him play properly as a centre-half for Sunderland, which is his strongest position. And I think that's one of those where you've got to be quite sensible as well and say, obviously we're hoping that this is the start of Sunderland's long stint in the Premier League, but it's not beyond the realms that you're talking about a championship squad in 12 months. Why not put yourself in a position where you've got a body of work where you can study that Leo Hjelde has played 35 games as a championship centre-half, and then you can make a decision on whether he can realistically be part of your squad. So looking at his contract, which has still got a few years left to run on it, looking at the fact that, as James says, he's still really young, for me, don't rush into it. Try and get him a good loan where he can play every week in his favoured position and make a more informed choice, if you like, a little bit further down the line, both for the club and the player.
Just on that point and jumping back a little bit, if Sunderland do find themselves in the Championship in 12 months' time, which, is a distinct possibility, you've got to be honest about that. I think Patterson probably goes, and then Matty Young, if he's coming off a really strong League One loan, is probably your number one goalkeeper in the Championship. That's how I would envisage that happening in that scenario.
I mean, he's got a huge mark potential, doesn't he, Matty Young? I think we're all sort of quite excited about what he could do in a Sunderland shirt. Jensen Seal, Phil, I mean, would you put him into a sort of similar category as Hjelde? Someone who, again, hasn't played a lot because of injury, seems to be a recurrent theme, but we know that he's got a decent amount of talent, don't we?
Yeah, I think, again, a really straightforward one for me. I'd be looking to get a loan move. If it's one where he trains for a period pre-season, gets some minutes in those sort of early pre-season games, great. But again, let him go and play. Get him in a team where he's got that responsibility, where he's relied on every week. 12 months down the line, you're in a much better position to make an informed decision. That would certainly be my view on it.
What about Timothy Pembele, James? Obviously, a man who was sent out on loan this season. Hasn't quite happened for him, I think it's fair to say, at Sunderland. I mean, another loan, a potential sale. Where do you see his future lying?
I think it's probably just best to cut losses now. I would say I would probably lean towards selling him. I know he sort of did okay at Le Havre last season. I think they were quite pleased with him. It feels pretty natural that he might go back there. I'm not sure. I haven't actually read too much about him, but again, it's really hard to judge these players, isn't it? Because he's come in and it hasn't worked for him, but he was playing in a Sunderland side that was struggling under Michael Beale, and he was in and out the side. We never saw him for 10, 15, 20 games, so you do have to reserve judgment to a degree. Having said that, from what I did see of him, I wasn't really that impressed. Some players, really come and grasp the opportunity. I didn't really think like Pembele did that. So for me, even if Sunderland were in the Championship in 12 months' time, I think we already sort of know that he's perhaps not at the level we want. I mean, Lebris was pretty clear, wasn't he, when he first came in, that he wasn't for him. So I think for me, a sale is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I think so. I think the challenge you've got. Yeah, I think Joe Anderson. I think it's time for him to go and play regularly. The only thing I would say about Joe Anderson, obviously, there have been opportunities for him to move in the last couple of windows, and he's decided he didn't want to do that at that time. So I guess that's the thing. And Anderson and Pembele are both in a category where you've got to obviously now appreciate the fact that they're on Premier League contracts, and that makes the sale process obviously a lot more challenging. So I think they could be ones that potentially run. I don't think it will necessarily be easily wrapped up, but Pembele and Anderson, for me, I think it's the right time for a permanent departure.
One last defensive option, James. Zach Johnson, again, sent out on loan last season. I mean, again, he's a player who we know he's a talented boy, but has he got enough to step up to the Premier League?
I don't think at the moment, no. I think the way I view Zach Johnson is it's a real shame he wasn't like 2 years older when Sunderland were in League One, because I think he probably would have broken through and played. He's still only 20 years old, He's obviously had a couple of loans. I think one was in Ireland. He's played for Notts County again last season. So for me, I'd be looking to loan him out next season and then again reassess depending on which division Sunderland are in. I do think he has a great deal of potential. You know, he's an England youth international as well, so there's definitely pedigree there. Really driven as a bloke. Whether he makes it at Sunderland or not, I don't know. I think the jury's still out, but I think it's too soon to be selling him. For me, anyway. Again, as Phil's mentioned previously, the player might have, you know, different ideas. He might want a settled home where he knows he's going to play for 2 or 3 years. He's also a Sunderland lad, though, so I'm guessing he'd quite like to play for the club regularly at some point. So I think there's a lot up in the air with that one. Have we lost Jace?
He's looking very pensive. So either you've said something that's really
stumped him. Right, well, I'll remove him, and then hopefully when he rejoins, it might work a bit better. But I have the list in front of me, so
should we make a start on midfielders, and then hopefully Chase can rejoin the party.
Well, let's start with a really easy one. Dan Neil, Phil.
Sell. No, I'm only joking. Yeah. Listen, I think again, you've already lost Joe Bellingham, so you don't, in my opinion, want to be losing any more of those sort of prominent midfielders, if you like, from the squad last season. I think he's a player who deserves his opportunity to step up, lead Sunderland into the Premier League. We obviously have that sort of minor contract situation, something like Dennis Circum, where there's only a year left. Sunderland will want that solved for obvious reasons before the season starts. But yeah, for me, Neil's one of those players that I'm backing to make the step up and be not just a squad player next season, but a first 11 player next season. So keep for me. No, personally, absolute no-brainer.
So you think that we're going off piste a little bit here, Phil, but in terms of Joe Bellingham leaving the club, Dan Neil has a bit of experience as a box-to-box midfielder. Could he potentially move into that position, do you think, next season?
Yeah, I think he definitely has the potential to do it. It's easy to forget that's where he played the bulk of his early career as well. I think the one thing I would say about that is it's going to be really interesting to see how LeBrie sets that midfield up, because moving it on a little bit, should we just both say now Enzo Lefebvre will probably keep? Yeah, is that
yeah. I mean, he's worth a look, isn't he? Certainly.
Yeah. If he pushes forward into the sort of number 10 role, you know, Sunderland might not necessarily it might look a bit more like a 4-2-3-1 next season. In which case, Dan Neil, I think, will be one of the two who plays a little bit deeper. And of course, within that, yes, he'll have opportunities to push forward and to play. But it might be that you have two sort of more sitters, if you like, and then Lefebvre has a bit more of a free rein in the 10. I can definitely see that scenario. So I do agree with you, but I think in part it'll be based on how LeBrie sets the team up, especially with Lefebvre, and how he then puts the jigsaw together around that. So yeah, we might see Neil be a bit more versatile next season, but I think he probably still will be playing a slightly more withdrawn role, would be my prediction anyway.
Alan Brown, Phil, I find myself pretty torn on Alan Brown. Again, being sort of unlucky with injuries last season. When we signed him, we were all massively excited and praising the recruitment model to the hilt. This is the experienced midfielder that we all wanted, that was going to help lead Sunderland to promotion. And whilst we did get promotion, Brown wasn't as maybe influential as we thought. I can see the pros and cons for both arguments, keeping him around, experience. You know, he's played international football. Could he make that step up to the Premier League? You know, but is he going to play when Sunderland bring reinforcements into that midfield? So there's an argument for loan or even selling, isn't there? I'm a bit torn on this one.
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult one. I think the reason why it's difficult for either of us to make a decision on this at the moment is because we don't really know exactly kind of what his true level is, because of injuries. I don't think we've seen him at full tilt for Sunderland. So I think that makes it really difficult for us to make an assessment on where we think he can get to. So at the moment, no problems in terms of having him around, giving him that pre-season period to prove his fitness and his level. I think I don't see Alan Brown wanting to hang around if he's not going to play. I think that's a big thing for me. When you look at the number of games he's got under his belt, I'm sure obviously he'll have ambitions to try and get back at international level as well. And that's obviously not going to happen if he's not playing. So for me, I am kind of leaning towards loan or sell for this one, not because I don't rate him as a player, just because I think that might be the best decision for him himself. But It'll be interesting. He'll be one of the players that you're looking at the first few games of pre-season to kind of see how he's getting on. But at this stage, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a potential departure in the works somewhere down the line.
Chris Rigg, Jason, keep, loan or sell?
I mean, do you have to ask? Yeah, I think you keep Chris Rigg if you can keep Chris Rigg. It's as simple as that, isn't it? And I know we've spoken about it a lot on the pod previously, but Sunderland, you would hope, are in a position whereby they have given themselves enough security that they should be able to keep Chris Rigg if that's what they want to do. And look, we know how good he was in the Championship. We know how young he is. We know that he's got this ridiculously high ceiling of potential. You would hope that he's only going to get better and better and better. And you know, it's really quite intriguing, isn't it, to sort of consider what he might be able to do with a year or two more experience under his belt in the top flight. Yeah, you got to keep Chris Rigg.
I feel like, Phil, that the Chris Rigg transfer speculation will probably ramp up as the window goes on, but I don't necessarily see him leaving for big money this summer. However, I'm not sure he signs a new contract either, with him having 2 years left on his deal. I think he'll want to play in the Premier League for Sunderland, but I think we're in that sort of awkward moment now, aren't we, where, you know, Chris Rigg probably knows he's destined for the top. He's probably going to want to stay at Sunderland for a little bit longer, but whether we can really nail him down long term again, I think might be a little bit of a bridge too far.
Potentially. I think this goes back to the heart of the Joe Bellingham debate as well, isn't it? Where you have more of a chance when players know that you're not necessarily going to stand in their way as long as the fee's sensible next year.
Yeah.
So you do have that example where you can say to Chris Rigg, look, just because you're signing a new contract doesn't mean that you have to stay here for another 3 years. Look, we've shown with Joe Bellingham, he signed a new contract last summer, didn't he? But when the valuation was right, they moved him on. So I kind of agree with you that I think that probably the most likely scenario is a little bit of things just kind of stay as they are for another year, and Rigg sort of tests himself at Premier League level. I think Sunderland, it would take stupid money, in my opinion, for them to sell him in this window, having already lost Joe Bellingham. So I agree with you. I think the most likely thing is we sort of stay in a little bit of a, I guess, holding pattern. But I wouldn't be. Let's see how it develops, because as I say, a big part of Sunderland's strategy is showing that, you know, just because he signed contracts, it doesn't mean that, you know, we're going to keep you against your will as long as the valuation's right.
Jamie Tete, Phil, he's got a year left on his deal, coming back from loan again.
I think it's time probably for a permanent departure. Player that I really liked when he first broke through into the team, carried the ball forward really well, brought a bit of dynamism to the team. Player with a lot of potential, but I think that it's really difficult seeing him getting into a Premier League squad now. I'm not sure there's much value in a loan, obviously, given that he's in the last year of his deal. I'm sure there'll be interest from League One clubs because of his record at that level. I think he's won 3 promotions now, hasn't he? Yeah. So for me, I'd be saying, you know, I think you have to accept that it's maybe time for a departure. And, you know, I don't think you stand in his way. I think you just do a sensible deal where maybe you have some incentives in future if, you know, he wins promotion or he's sold again for a decent fee. So yeah, I'd be looking to get him a permanent home where he can just sort of really settle down and try and sort of rebuild his career after those injuries.
Milan Alexic, Jay, still only 19 years old, obviously came to the club very highly rated, but struggled to find a position really or any sort of regular minutes under Labrise. I felt a bit sorry for him at times. I remember him being parachuted into the team away at Norwich City, a drab 0-0 draw on the right-hand side of the attack, which just wasn't his position at all. My good feeling is a loan.
Yeah, I think you're very probably right. And there have been reports in recent days, haven't there, that, you know, potentially return back to Serbia. I think that, again, I said it about a few players already, but he's obviously a player that has an immense amount of natural talent, but it's just about giving him the opportunity to hone that. And he's still so young, like you say. You know, is it better for him to be sat in the under-21s for a season or two? Is it better for him to be going out playing senior football and sort of trying to bring himself up to that level and realise his potential? And I think the obvious answer is very probably the latter, to be honest with you. So, yeah, I agree with you. I do feel sorry for him. I think that, you know, it probably didn't quite work out last season in the way that he would have envisaged it. But, you know, certainly the opportunity for him to get minutes is one that I don't think he or Sunderland can necessarily turn down.
What do you make of that Milan question, Phil? Because you don't want him to go down the Jefferson Bennett route. Obviously, coming to the club, highly rated, bordering on an international footballer. I think Jefferson Bennett was an international footballer. Milan Alexic has been called up to the Serbian national squad before. You don't want to see him sort of stagnate, do you? That next loan has to be really good.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting dilemma and debate around this as well, because it's like it's similar to Bennett as well. You have this thing where you want him to be playing regularly in a settled environment where he's comfortable. At the same time, obviously the big thing with one of the big things with Alexic is you want him to his language to improve as well, because that's obviously one of the big challenges he's had in his first year. So it's a really difficult decision in terms of where is the best place for him. But I definitely think a loan is the right move, and I think obviously Partizan Belgrade's been mentioned. Good standard, familiar environment. I do think that makes sense. I'd much prefer a sort of straight loan, because I think, again, we've seen with Eliza Maenda, you have to give these players time. You don't want to rush into anything. But if there was a very, very good option clause, as we saw with Pierre Ekwa and Sanetti, and then I wouldn't necessarily be against that. But yeah, for sure, I think loans a sensible move at this point.
Let's move on to Ekwa, Phil. What do you reckon? It seems pretty certain he's going to leave, and Sunderland are going to get a decent fee for him at least. Obviously, some of that will be owed to West Ham as well. A player I really liked when he joined, but I think timing and unfortunately it just hasn't worked out in the end, has it?
No, it hasn't, and I think that I think there were question marks over his sort of role and place at the start of the pre-season last time out, and then obviously he got that back injury, which was really badly timed from his perspective, and that's just how football goes, isn't it? Sometimes, and yeah, I think that it's a win-win, isn't it? It's a decent fee for Sunderland. It's a good opportunity for Ekwa in terms of an environment he knows well. You're sort of reading about there's a decent project there at Sanetti, and even though they've been relegated, I think they have quite wealthy owners who are investing. So I don't think it's a bad move for him. I just think it is. I agree with you in the sense that it's a shame because we know the level that he can reach. But I think it's the right time. I think everyone's a winner out of this one.
You could actually argue, Phil, that the transfer of Pierre Ekwa when we got him from West Ham, it's been a relative success in terms of Sunderland plucking somebody from an under-21s team. They've given him time in the Championship, and whilst he isn't staying around for a long time, it's worked in a sense that it's helped springboard his senior career, really, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we know there's a pretty chunky sell-on clause for West Ham, so it's not the same level of huge profit that we've seen with like Clark and Bellingham and players like that. But still a very, very, very sort of chunky profit. Ekwa did play a role. That team did get to the playoffs that first year, and he was a big part of that. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't put it down as like a transfer miss or anything like that. A good, talented player, played his part, didn't quite work out for whatever reason, but Sunderland aren't losing out. So yeah, I think it's just one of those things, isn't it? That happens every now and then.
It is. This next one is quite interesting, Jace. Nectar Triantis obviously has been at Hibs on loan 2 seasons on the trot, actually. Hibs finished 3rd last season in the Scottish Premier League. Triantis has been playing as a midfielder. He's been earning rave reviews. Reports are that he wants to keep playing so he can get up to speed and get into either the Greece or Australia national teams ahead of upcoming international tournaments. I think there's a lot of Sunderland players, actually, Jace, that would like a look at him. Sunderland fans,
yeah.
sorry.
No, yeah, I know you mean. I'm kind of one of them, to be honest with you. Like, my heart says, give him a chance. Like, in pre-season, at least, I think it's definitely worth sort of seeing, the level that he's at. Like you said, it's not just that he's gone and had a pretty solid stint in Scotland. He's been like a shining light in the Scottish Premiership and consistently over the course of an entire campaign. Obviously, we haven't really seen him in that defensive midfield role for Sunderland. He was sort of converted after the fact, wasn't he, when he went north of the border? So I think it's a very interesting prospect. That being said, I think it feels more likely to me that he probably will move on again. It just depends if Sunderland kind of want to remain in this pattern of sending him out and, seeing how far he can develop or potentially cashing in while his stock is high. I'd be interested to sort of see what Phil thinks about this. But for me personally, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a sale this summer.
Phil?
Yeah, I think it's a more than fair. He's got 2 years left on his current contract. I think it's a more than fair decision to sell while his stock's high. going all a bit football manager, I think maybe the ideal scenario is to extend his contract and loan him out for another year. And the reason I say that is it puts him in, I think, in a similar category to Leo Hjelde, where in a year's time, if he has had another good loan, and you don't think he's going to be part of your squad, you can sell. But if you are potentially being a championship club again and you're losing a couple of your midfielders, then why not put him in that conversation? So if it was me, I'd actually be trying to extend his contract and get him another good loan and making a decision next summer. But I think putting your pragmatic head on, to sell while there are lots of clubs who want them and are prepared to pay you $1 million plus asking price, I certainly wouldn't be sitting here criticising saying that's a wrong decision.
Jan Poveda, Phil, what would you do with Jan Poveda?
I think just move on. I think obviously some of it was down to injuries last season, but I think it was clear that Lebris wasn't necessarily going to select him either way. Obviously far from ideal in terms of, the financial side of things, but I think sometimes you just got to accept the inevitable. I think just help him find another club, I think, for me.
Going to be hard, though. He's got 3 years left on his deal, hasn't he?
Yeah.
And he's on...
Yeah, that's what I mean. It won't be simple, though. Certainly from a financial perspective, that's not going to be easy for Sunderland to do. But I think sometimes you just got to accept the inevitable, right? Yeah, that would be... I know what you're saying, but definitely not going to be straightforward. I think you're right to point that out. But I think sometimes you just got to accept that something hasn't worked.
Adil Al-Shish, Jace?
Yeah, sort of similar to Pembele, this one, I think, in the sense that it's probably the time to move him on. Obviously, Ashish is, you could argue, offered a fair amount more than Pembele has in a red and white shirt, but he did really well when he was sort of parachuted into that unfamiliar left wing position last season and really sort of applied himself, despite the fact that he wasn't in and around the team for the vast majority of the campaign. That being said, he's probably at a juncture in his career where he needs to be playing regular first team football. Is he going to get that at Sunderland? Is he going to get that at Sunderland in the Premier League? Almost certainly not. And I think for that reason, you sort of look at it and you go, well, it's probably the right time to move him on.
Abdullah Barfield, perhaps in the same category as Ekwa in terms of coming to the club, has become a senior footballer, hasn't quite worked out, has gone on loan, but probably best for him if he leaves. Yeah,
it's a sale for me. That's the I think it's the best thing. I think if you look at the way it went last season, I think it's really difficult for me to envisage a scenario where Bar comes and plays back in regularly, whether it's this season or next season. I think that it's time for him to try and find somewhere where he can play every week and really feel part of it and feel really settled. So, I think he showed a lot of talent at times, scored some really good goals. But I think a sale is the best option at this point for all parties.
Harrison Jones, for me, definitely a loan needed. I think it would be great if he could go out somewhere and start playing regularly, get those, that pattern of games under his belt. But I wouldn't actually be that surprised, Jace, to see him in and around the squad in the Premier League, just because Lebris really, really likes him, and then perhaps you reassess in January.
Yeah, potentially. And I think Lebris likes him with good reason as well. He's obviously shone for the under-21s for a good long while now. He's made the step up to the first team really well. I know there hasn't necessarily been that sort of like dynamite performance that he's exploded on the scene with, but whenever he's been called upon, he's again applied himself really well. Looks to be very comfortable in that sort of squad dynamic as well. I do think that for his personal development, I think a loan probably makes more sense. I think that he's at a point where if he can get a good solid run, whether it's League One, Championship, wherever, under his belt, he could really kick on and he could really sort of, go to a whole new level. And that's only going to happen if he gets minutes, really, isn't it? So for me, ideal world, you find a good loan for him and you see what he can do, really.
Patrick Roberts, Phil, for me, stays at the club and helps Sunderland in the Premier League, with the caveat that Sunderland are going to need reinforcements on those wings in terms of general pace. I think something Roberts probably lacks. He's got a great deal going for him in terms of the way he can change the game, how he can pick out a pass. His ball carrying is exceptional, but I think Sunderland are going to need different options on those flanks.
Yeah, on both wings, Sunderland need new recruits. Definitely you need competition and for Roberts, that's what Poveda was supposed to do last season and didn't. And Roberts did really well to stay fit. for the vast majority of the season. So, for me, Roberts is an absolute stay with some added competition. And the one thing I would say about Roberts as well is the pattern of his career at Sunderland that we've all said, he tends to get better when better players are around him who he can bounce off. So let's get Lafayne the 10. Let's get some more quality in this squad. I reckon Patrick Roberts might just pleasantly surprise a few people at that level. But I agree with you, absolutely non-negotiable. You need some more competition in that position. That would be on both flanks, not just the right. That would be one of my big priorities for this summer transfer window.
This podcast has gone quite long, so I'm going to whiz through a couple of the remaining ones in a group, Phil. But Mayenda, Isidore, Mundle, I'm pretty comfortable with those three players staying and being in the Premier League. I think Mayenda and Mundle, well, and Isidore, actually, they've got real potential. I think because of Mayenda's emergence towards the back end of last season, we actually forget how amazing some of Isidore's goals were towards the start. It just some absolutely sublime finishes. The one at Ellen Road and the one against Leeds at home, actually, just ridiculous. Sheffield United at home, just unbelievable.
Yeah, definitely a really brilliant signing. Has some top level experience, not the Premier League, but some top level experience. And I think the way that Sunderland are going to play next year might potentially be really suited to him. There's going to be a lot of counter-attacking football. There's going to be a lot of trying to catch teams out with his pace over the top. Yeah, absolutely no doubt in my mind that Isidore's one of your options going into the new season. And yes, his form wasn't great towards the very end of the season. But I think what he did over the course of his first year was excellent. And don't forget as well, he hadn't played loads of football when he arrived. And then he was playing every single week for, sometimes twice a week for 4 or 5 months. So if there was a little bit of dip at the end of the season, I don't think that's a huge surprise. So good rest for him, good pre-season. Yeah, let's see what he can do. I'm excited about what he can do.
And Mayenda and Mundle, Jace, fairly confident again that those two could, with their physical attributes, their intelligence, can step up to the Premier League.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I think Mayenda in particular is one that I'm really excited by because we've said it before, but the trajectory that he's on, the rate at which he's improving and just stepping up the challenges time and time again, taking them in his stride. Not necessarily saying that he's going to take to the Premier League straight away because it's a really difficult division, but I think that he has the potential to really make a go of it next season. So, yeah, very much excited to see what both of those players, to be fair, can do in the top flight.
Lewis, Hamir, Semedo, Phil, discuss.
Yeah, got to be a sale, I think. Obviously, hasn't really worked out for him at Juve next gen either. Really difficult. We've talked about players who potentially could come into the fold maybe next season and the ones who probably won't. I think Hamir is in that category. So for me, it's a sale, but all the same things that we said about Pembele, Joe Anderson, Bar, obviously players going on to Premier League contracts makes it much more difficult to move them on. And there's potentially going to be a little bit of financial pain there for Sunderland, but I think it's just the right thing to do, both for the club and for the player at this point.
The same could be said of Nazrus and Jace as well. Obviously slightly older, made more of an impact in Sunderland's first team, but it's not going to happen from here, is it?
No, I don't think it is. And I think, it's sort of a bit of an indictment of where he's at right now, that it hasn't really happened for him at Hajduk Split either over in Croatia. I think that, assuming they don't take up the option to make his move permanent, I think Sunderland will still be looking to try and get him out the door on a permanent basis. Again, it's one of them. Just sometimes it just doesn't work out because not every signing could be an absolute hit, and Rusyn just hasn't really done it in a red and white shirt. Again, like you say, he's a little bit older. I think he certainly needs to be playing first team football somewhere, but I just don't see it being at Sunderland next season.
Ahmed Abdullahi, Phil, I think he's still only, I think he might be 20 now, obviously brought to the club injured, was playing well for the under-21s, but then was taken out, I think, just to sort of protect him. Haven't really seen him anywhere near the first team. For me, I mean, I could see him going out on loan, but I could also see him staying at the club to play for the 21. Yeah. So he wouldn't necessarily be a first-team option.
No, I think that he's probably one in a slightly different category to some of the players where you're looking at saying, oh, well, definitely loan or sell because they're not going to play regularly. It's hard at this point to see Abdullahi playing regularly in the Premier League. But because he just hasn't really had that extended training time, that time to adapt at Sunderland, I'd be really tempted to, as you say, have him in the squad for pre-season, let him have a full block of training, make a sort of more informed decision. You've got the January window there. Why can't Abdullahi get a loan move in that window and go and play somewhere regularly for the second half of the season? I think that would work if you needed to. But definitely, he's one of the ones where I'd be looking at it saying we don't need to rush into anything here. Let's get him training. Let's get him some minutes in pre-season. There's obviously going to be a process where Sunderland are going to be getting their squad together. It's not going to be ready to go on the first day of pre-season. So, let's give it time and have a proper look at him.
Jace, the last man on our list is Trey Ogunsui, a player that we're both quite fond of, very talented player as well. I think he stays at Sunderland, probably competes within the under-21s, but I could see a loan for him at some point, maybe, possibly even after January, he could go to the National League like we've seen some Sunderland players do, but hugely talented player.
Oh, yeah, massive amount of potential. And like you say, someone who we've watched quite a lot. I think that he has a big future ahead of him if all the pieces fall into place. I think that given his age and given what he's shown, there's absolutely no rush to be sending him out. And, he doesn't necessarily need to be playing senior football right this second. I do think you're right, though. I think that we could reach a point at some point over the coming season where it becomes apparent that 21's football is not necessarily beneath him, but he's sort of outgrown it a little bit. And I think for that reason, absolutely consider a loan at that point. But for now, I've got nothing against him sort of staying around the club, playing a bit of 21's football and just continuing what is proven to be a really promising development.
So, Phil, of the 36 players we've discussed, I've been taking notes during, and we've only got 15 first teamers staying at the club. So
right?
This exercise really, and that's including Alan Brown as well, who may well go. That exercise sort of underlines the challenge Sunderland's recruitment team have, isn't it?
It absolutely does. Yeah, I don't think there's a position on the pitch really where you would say that Sunderland are fully stocked in terms of don't need to make any more additions. So there's a huge amount of work to be done, isn't there? I think it's really stark when you put it like that in terms of there being 15 players. We know Sunderland like to run a small squad, but that is definitely pushing it. So but no, it's really, when you go through it, it's really simple, isn't it? You need 2 centre halves, you need probably 2 fullbacks, you need 2 wingers. So there's 6 straight off the bat. Really, I think obviously the numbers is a challenge, but also Sunderland's budget isn't infinite, and there's going to be that balance between making those investments in the right areas to get the quality you need, but also what's going to be really important is getting those guys in who aren't going to eat up a huge amount of your budget, but are going to be good enough to play a part of that level. Good luck, Christian, and potentially good luck, Florent Gisolfi, because it's a huge window. Well,
good luck us as well, because we're going to have to report on potentially 17 players leaving and then potentially another, 12, 13 joining. So, and Sunderland tend to leave a lot of these to transfer deadline day as well. So that's going to be fun.
Well, hopefully, I'm hoping this year might be, they probably will still be doing business on deadline day. Obviously, they're operating in a slightly different market now. That's the one thing I would say is a big part of the reason why, like most championship clubs, they're always doing business late on, is obviously because they're waiting for Premier League clubs to make their decisions. So I'm quietly hopeful that there might be a bit more quick moving this year, but we'll see.
Yeah. What's your ideal sort of transfer window look like, Jace, for you in terms of who would you really like to see Sunderland bring in from the names linked?
I mean, to be honest, at this moment in time, there have been so many that it's kind of like hard to specify. Really,
it's north of 50. It's north of 50 names already. It's crazy.
It's madness, isn't it? And it's only going to gather pace as we go on. We're not even at the end of June yet. We've got another 2 months of this. It's going to get a little bit manic, I think it's fair to say. My gut feeling has always kind of been that the players who I think Sunderland, or a lot of the players I think Sunderland will ultimately end up seriously pursuing, are probably players that we either A, haven't really heard of, or B, haven't really considered at this specific moment in time. Obviously, you're seeing the likes of Vladislav Van Aert linked, looks like a really promising player, but there are probably another, 5, 6, 7 strikers of that ilk who Sunderland are potentially keeping an eye on or performing at that level across Europe. And I think it's just really, really hard to sort of pick any specific name at this moment in time. But like you said, it's going to be crazy, isn't it?
Any final transfer thoughts, Phil, before we round off?
Any final transfer thoughts? No, I don't think so. I feel like
book a holiday, get away.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I would say is that I think at this time of year, it's always worth remembering that there's probably a little bit of something in 90% of these links, but sometimes it can be as basic as, someone inquiring about a player's availability and what their situation is. And then obviously it benefits the other party for that to then come out as, Sunderland are interested in X. I think at the moment it's probably a reflection of the fact that Sunderland were a little bit behind because of the playoffs. They've now moved into their stage of they've got this long list of potential players and they're going out and acquiring the intel that they need. So there's probably something in all of these rumours, or most of them. Some of them probably are complete nonsense. But it doesn't necessarily, mean that it's anything more than that at this stage. So I would say take a deep breath. Still early days. Still try and enjoy Wembley if you can. Let's see what the next week brings.
Well, that was good fun. Thank you, gents. You can catch all of the latest Sunderland transfer news over at the Sunderland Echo website. There is a lot. Check out Phil's on the whistle videos as well. We'll probably bring you another podcast next week. Thank you once again for tuning in.